So I've now read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I had read Sense and Sensibility a few months ago, and so this is the second Jane Austen book I read. And I think I enjoyed this one more than Sense and Sensibility. Sense and Sensibility was really good. I really enjoyed the characters, but the thing that got me was the fact that at the end of it, the girls just had to get married. There was no sort of feminist utopia where they can just live the rest of their lives. It even felt a bit forced that they all had to marry to live happily ever after, which I get in the context of late 18th century Britain, a woman of the sort of, not aristocracy, or maybe it is our aristocracy, a woman who's not really working, does need a husband to sort of support her, which sounds awful, but in that society, that I know it was necessary. Anyways, that was that book. Pride and Prejudice feels much more like a love story than Sense and Sensibility did. Sense and Sensibility, again, I'm comparing it to the other one, it felt like a lot of the characters settled for, okay, fine, I guess I'll marry this person. Whereas with Pride and Prejudice, it was very much what I would call the main character, Elizabeth, is very much deciding for herself who she wants and who she's going to be with, and does fall in love with someone, and that person is in love with her, and it is really nice. Now, it does feel a bit tropey or maybe formulaic. I think that's just because so much has been influenced by it, and I can't hold that against it. Although, again, to compare to Sense and Sensibility, there was a lot of sort of crossover of tropes. And like I said, maybe it is just the formula where there's a group of sisters, they're all single, they all want to meet someone. They meet this guy, he seems like the dreamboat and he's really great, but it turns out he's actually a really awful person. And in Sense and Sensibility, that was Willoughby. In Pride and Prejudice, it's Wickham. They feel very similar. And then, of course, there's the other girl who really nasty and wants to break people up because she's jealous. So that's like Miss Steele in Sense and Sensibility and Miss Bingley in Pride and Prejudice. And of course, they live in sort of a rural estate, and they go to town at some point in the book. They have to go visit someone and spend the time in London. And again, the sort of same formula, but it's still a great book. So like I said, our main character is this Elizabeth Bennett. She has an older sister, Jane Bennett, who Elizabeth and Jane are kind of the only sort of, I don't know how to word it, good people, normal people, not problematic people in the family. The rest of the family's kind of wacko weirdos, kind of not quite genteel and proper and accomplished and whatnot as Jane and Elizabeth. So there's Mary, the very bookish one, the middle child, who I like Mary in that she does not care at all about men and would just rather sit and read books all day. I do really like Elizabeth, but I kind of vibe with Mary. Then there's Kitty, or Catherine, who's second youngest. She's very similar to Lydia, the youngest, who's just crazy for men and just is her whole life. Sure, you know girls like this, that they're only interested in boys and they're always chasing after boys, and it's all about balls and drama and who's in love with who. And Austen is wonderful at creating characters. Her characters are so believable that even when I read Sense and Sensibility, I thought this must be like based on a true story, in that the characters are so real, they have to have been real people that she's basing them off of. We have Mrs. Bennett, the mother, who, again, she reminds me of someone. She's very sort of frantic and changes her mood all the time. Something she thinks things are awful, but then she'll change her mind and it's great. She really wants all her children to get married. She's very hyper. And there's Mr. Bennett, who I really like. Mr. Bennett, I feel like of all the characters, I'm either the most like Mr. Bennett or I want to be the most like Mr. Bennett. So he's a bit sort of foolish or goofy, but he is so sarcastic and so dry, and he really likes Elizabeth. She's his favorite, but he's just such a goof in some ways, but very, very funny guy. And the story starts like all of these stories start, with a young single bachelor moving into town. Of course, he's very wealthy. His name's unfortunately Mr. Bingley, and Jane's sort of fallen head over heels with him, and it seems like he's falling head over heels with Jane. And so that's sort of our first relationship, and we think it's going to work out well. But Bingley brings with him this friend, Darcy, who immediately everyone's turned off by. He's so proud and he seems so above them. He's way wealthier than Bingley. He sees sort of the actions of the Bennett family and is like, oh, they're very below me. Although he does admit Elizabeth catches his eye, specifically her eyes are quite dazzling, I think he describes them as. But he's very standoffish, and Elizabeth and the rest of the family are like, oh, what a horrible, awful man who thinks he's so better than us. Like, ugh, Darcy, gross. And immediately you're like, all right, so Darcy and Elizabeth are going to end up together. But Bingley and Darcy have to go back to town, and Bingley doesn't return. and it seems like he's either didn't really have a thing for Jane, or he's moved on, or Jane's not good enough for him. And so Jane's like a really wholesome, nice person. She's always sees the best in everyone, but she loves him, but she comes to the conclusion that she has to get over it. She's very well put together, much like Elizabeth. Meanwhile, we have this Mr. Collins who comes in. So he's the cousin of the Bennets. He's the one who's set to inherit Longbourn, their estate, because Mr. Bennett does not have any male heirs, and because of the weird way and then in treaties work, the estate has to pass to a male heir, and so it's going to go to their cousin, Mr. Collins. And he shows up. He's a wacky character. He's very silly, very goofy. He does his best to sort of very milady, like he'll really big up people, and he'll try his best to be really interested in what you're saying, and he'll praise everything about you, and he's written so well that he's this type of guy that thinks like, hey, I'm a great guy, but everyone's kind of really annoyed with him and thinks he's a bit of a weirdo. And anyways, he comes to Longbourn with the intention of marrying one of the Bennets. He's like, look, I'm going to inherit this house from you guys. I don't want you guys to be destitute, so I'll marry one of you, and then, look, the house will stay in the family. And he comes in, first he's like, sets his eyes on Jane, of course, the eldest, and then Mrs. Bennet's kind of like, no, Jane's kind of going with this guy Bingley. Don't go for Jane. So then he's like, well, Elizabeth then. Oh, I will marry Elizabeth. And proposes to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth's like, ew, no, what? No, like, pick someone else. I'm not marrying you. Like, sorry. She's really nice about it, but he will not take no for an answer. He's very much like, oh, you women, I know you're saying no, but you really mean yes, and you'll come around. And oh, I know your games, like you play off like, oh no, I don't want to, but secretly you do. You'll come around. Just like really gross and weird, but she's still steadfastly like, no, sorry, I'm leaving. And he's like, oh yeah, sure. And he goes to talk to her mother, and her mother's like, well, if she said no, she probably means no. This is kind of like the one of the few redeeming points to the mother. And so Mr. Collins, he's quite distraught. He's like, what? Why would she reject me? I'm trying to help them out with the house inheritance thing. And he ends up going and marrying one of the neighbor's daughters, who, Charlotte Lucas, who's a friend of Elizabeth's. And Elizabeth's like, really, Charlotte? You're going to settle for him? And Charlotte's like, look, he's got enough money. I can live comfortably. Sure, there's not really love or attraction there, but I'm okay settling for this. And she's like, okay, girl, good for you. And Charlotte goes off. Then we have the third man entering, this Wickham, Mr. Wickham, who, again, seems like the dreamboat. He's this young officer in the militia. He's super nice and kind, and everyone thinks he's great, and Elizabeth's falling for him, and he's chatting up Elizabeth. They mention Darcy, and he's like, oh, they run into Darcy in the village, and there's a reaction there. You can tell these people know each other. So Wickham tells Elizabeth that, yeah, I actually grew up with Darcy. His father, the former Mr. Darcy, was really good to me, and he loved me like a son, and he offered me this, I can't think of the name of it, it's the same thing in Sense and Sensibility, this job as a clergyman on his estate. So it's like sort of a good income. But when he died, the new Mr. Darcy, the young one, he refused it from me and wouldn't give me my proper inheritance. And so I've been destitute. And oh, he's such a proud, horrible man, and I wasn't good enough for him, and blah, blah, blah. And of course, this is all fitting in with Elizabeth's prejudice. She's prejudging Darcy, hence the title of the book. Pride being, of course, Darcy's pride. So she thinks, oh, wow, Darcy's awful. Wickham's great. But then later, Wickham ends up running after this other girl who's wealthy. So, oops, I guess they're not going to get with Wickham. So, of course, they go to town. Jane goes to town in the hopes of running into Bingley, but she never does. Elizabeth goes into town and stays with Charlotte and Mr. Collins. There's this whole thing with an aunt and a cousin, which just sort of more elements to the plot. But I think it's at this point when she's in town, she runs into Darcy, or Darcy runs into her, and Darcy proposes to her, and she's like kind of shocked. I mean, from her perspective, this is out of nowhere, but the reader kind of has that dramatic irony where we sort of know that Darcy's got these feelings for her, even though he's very proud and standoffish about it. And it's a wonderful scene where she just lets him have it. Like, you are so proud and uptight, and I don't care if you were even proposed to me in a more gentlemanly way, I would have still said no. And how Mr. Wickham told me all about you and how horrible you've been to him, and also my sister Jane, and Bingley's been avoiding her, and it's probably because of you. And she just lets him have it, and he's like shocked and sort of horrified. He expected that, I'm this sort of wealthy, proud aristocrat. I'm offering her this like not lowborn, but this like much lower on this class stratum than me, like such a great life. She's denying me. It really is a shock and a blow to his pride. And Elizabeth's just like bewildered by this. And anyways, they separate. But then later, Elizabeth and her aunt and uncle decide to go up on a tour north, just touring around, checking stuff out. And they're near Pemberley, Darcy's estate. And they're like, hey, we should check out this estate. Like, it's really famous, a big old manor house. Let's just check it out. And she's like terrified to go see Darcy. But she finds out from some servants that Darcy's not home. So she's like, okay, if he's not home, fine, we'll go. And of course, who do they run into when they get there? But Darcy arrives. She's shocked. Like, after this scene, this like spat fight horrible thing that they've went through, she's like, how is he going to react? But the people in this book, some of them, like Darcy and Elizabeth, they have, I don't want to say good breeding, or they're very civilized, but when people around them are acting horrible or have acted horrible, they are still super polite and super nice to them, and they don't like tell them how it is and tell them how they really feel. No, they are genuinely really good about it, which I guess is just something everyone should be like. But anyways, Darcy is super nice to her and asks her about her family and sort of kind of pretends that nothing happened between them. But as she's sort of touring his estate and meeting his servants, and they're all sort of lauding him and saying he's such a great master, he's so kind to us, and people think he's proud, but he's really actually like generally a really liberal person, and we really enjoy and are glad to work for him. And she's sort of shocked by this. And I did forget to mention that Darcy did, after their big fight, sent her a letter explaining himself, where he explains that yes, he sort of did convince Bingley to leave Jane, but he did so because he did not see that Jane had any interest in Bingley, and genuinely thought that Bingley, because Bingley's this sort of person that will run after a girl and fall madly in love with her when it's sort of to his disadvantage, and the girl doesn't reciprocate the feelings or is just after his money. So that's why Darcy had sort of separated Bingley from Jane, but he admits that had he known Jane was actually reciprocating the feelings, then he wouldn't have got involved. But then he also goes into the whole Wickham situation, and he explains that yes, Wickham had been set to inherit this sort of job, this posting in my land, but Wickham denied it, said he didn't want to be part of the clergy and it wasn't to his lifestyle. So I gave him a whole bunch of money instead, and Wickham went off and blew all that money and then asked for more, and he blew all that. And then, to make matters worse, Wickham went after Darcy's sister, who is quite a bit younger than Darcy, and so Darcy really looks after. And I'm not sure if he slept with her. It's never explicit about this or what. Although knowing Wickham, it could have been that he did sort of sleep with this Miss Darcy and then took off. But that's why Darcy's like, Wickham's a horrible, horrible person. Anyway, so having heard that story sort of kind of changes her opinion about Darcy, but then meeting him on his estate and sort of seeing him in his element and noticing this sort of change that's come over him, she's sort of coming around to the fact that, geez, this Darcy's kind of a great guy. And he has sort of changed a bit, and it's because of, it's revealed later, but because of Elizabeth's rejection of him, that he sort of has to do a bit of self-reflection and well, why was I so proud and think that she would just accept me, and she didn't, and said that I wasn't even gentlemanly. And so he really was changing because of her. And so then, of course, things start to get slowly better and better, and Bingley and Darcy come back to the sort of the town in Hertfordshire where the Bennets live, and Jane and Bingley start courting again, or whatever you call it. And Darcy sort of says that, sort of grants permission to Bingley that, like, this girl's actually really into you, go ahead with it. And so they propose and are going to get married, which is fantastic. And then, because of a whole thing with an aunt and a conversation, it eventually gets out to Darcy that, hey, maybe Elizabeth's still kind of, there's sort of a chance. And he's always continued to love her after this, despite her disapproval of him. And so they finally get a chance to have a real heart-to-heart, and it all comes out, and they propose, and they're going to get married, which totally shocks the family. Like, they still have this prejudice against the pride of Darcy, but the mother especially is really thrown, because she's like, she hates Darcy, but he's super rich and her daughter's going to marry him. And so she's kind of like, ugh, she's kind of frozen like a robot with two conflicting programs. But she comes around, and The father too is really like, really, Darcy? Like, Elizabeth, I really like you. Are you sure you want this? She's like, no, actually, I'm in love with him. He's like, really? And it's revealed then to the rest of the family. Elizabeth had known this, but Lydia, at this point, the youngest daughter, who's only 16, has run off with Wickham. And they're supposedly going to get married, but again, Wickham's up to his old tricks, and he's just living with her, with the 16-year-old girl, without getting married, with no intention of getting married, which in 18th century Britain, if you're of the sort of upper class, this is a big, big no-no. And the whole family is distraught that this has happened to their daughter. And when Darcy finds out about this, he doesn't tell anyone, but he rushes to London. He hunts down Wickham. He tells him, like, you are marrying this girl or else. And he gets Wickham a job in this other regiment up north and pays off all Wickham's debts and sets them all up. And he does all of this sort of out of the kindness of his heart, to sort of, not for Wickham's sake and not for Lydia's sake, not even for the Bennett family's sake, but for Elizabeth's sake. And so the family's sort of rejoicing that despite this sort of horrible situation their youngest child is in, that it's all worked out. She is getting married, so it's okay that they had been living together beforehand. And somehow he's got a job and his debts are all paid off, and the Mr. Bennett doesn't even have to pay that much money to help with this new family. Darcy had kept this secret. Elizabeth had found it out, and then Elizabeth, once the proposal goes through, explains it to the rest of the family, who are just overjoyed and find out, oh, this Darcy is a fantastic guy. Although Mr. Bennett is still like, I still think Wickham's my favorite son-in-law, the one who ran off with a 16-year-old daughter with no intention of marrying her. He's a wacky guy. He's so funny though. Yeah, so they all live happily ever after. Mary still doesn't get married, keeps reading books. Kitty sort of doesn't go down the path of Lydia and becomes a better person. Mr. Collins is still being wacky. Yeah, that's the gist of it. I really liked it. But the same length as Sense and Sensibility, which again I also really like. Do think I like this one a bit more. I think next I need to read Emma. I need sort of a third data point to see if these books are all sort of very formulaic and tropey, or if they deviate, if they are different from one another, or more different. But yeah, that was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen.